So, Micah Parsons and Terry McLaurin have both requested a trade. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Or if you are new here, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trying to get to 200 before the season starts, so any help would be appreciated. Today, gonna talk about Micah Parsons, Terry McLaurin. I've been asked quite a lot about this. Is this something the Browns would be interested in? Is it something they could even do? Lots of talk about it on social media as well. So wanted to just make this a quick one, give my thoughts on, the possibility of the Browns, either trading for a Micah Parsons or a Terry McLaurin. First things first, which is more likely? This might sound crazy considering it's fucking Micah Parsons, but it's Micah Parsons. That if the Browns would go into trade for either one of these two players, it would be Micah Parsons. That's because that is a splash that sets you up long term versus a Terry McLaurin, which is, a bit more of a rental. He will be 30 years old when the season starts as a wide receiver. We all know how it goes for 30-year-old wide receivers. It does seem to be the cutoff point for when they start to decline. Not always the case, but it does happen a lot. So would the Browns be more interested in a 30-year-old wide receiver long term or a 26-year-old pass rusher who is one of the best defensive players in the NFL regardless of position? It's obviously the pass rusher in Micah Parsons. That doesn't mean that 100% they wouldn't trade for Terry McLaurin, but I do think it's close to 100%. It's something that I would be shocked by. As I mentioned, he's going to be 30 when the season starts. Once Amari Cooper hit 30 years old, it was quite evident that the Browns didn't want much to do with him anymore. That was obviously then, confirmed when they traded him. Yes, you could say it's partly because of the season they were having, whatever. But they clearly didn't have him in their long-term plans even before they made that trade. And just apply that to Terry McLaurin as well, I believe. Terry is at this point, based on last season, has definitely proved himself to be a better wide receiver right now than Amari Cooper. But that still doesn't justify, giving up assets for a 30-year-old wide receiver with everything that I've just mentioned. And as well, I do find it a bit odd to, for anyone to both claim that, the Browns are the worst team in the NFL and everyone should be fired, but then that they're a wide receiver away from competing. That doesn't make much sense to me. You can't really believe both of those things. I think they are mutually exclusive. I know I'm usually honest saying, these things aren't mutually exclusive, but I think that is. I don't really understand that, how you could, have that such negative view on the team, but then think that a 30-year-old wide receiver is going to just completely change that. Newsflash, it's not. Even if they did get Terry McLaurin, if the Browns are as bad as you think they are, it's not going to move the needle that much. So you're essentially giving up assets for a player that's, got 1 year left on his contract. Is he going to re-sign here if the team is awful? I doubt it, especially at this point in his career. So you would just be giving up assets, as I said, for a rental for a 30-year-old wide receiver. I wouldn't do it, and I also don't think the Browns would do it. I would be absolutely shocked if they traded for a Terry McLaurin. I really would. What do I think would even happen with him overall? I think he probably stays in Washington. They've got up to 3 years of control with him with the franchise tag. So I think they'll probably get something worked out, and he'll stay in Washington. But the more interesting one for me is a Micah Parsons. Terry made his trade request, in the kind of standard way, whereas Micah kind of followed suit on the Myles Garrett route, but went even further. Myles with the 1-page trade request and Micah with the 3-page trade request. Quite a read, it really was, and quite damning on the Cowboys franchise. First and foremost, let me just say, For everyone that moans about Andrew Berry, I get it, I really do, but and kind of has that outlook that he's the worst GM ever and all of this stuff. It is important to look around the rest of the league before you make these comments, because as I've said, as many people say, there are a lot worse, whether that's owners, coaches, GMs. I can assure you the Browns aren't the only ones with questionable, positions in these roles. Jerry Jones, we all know just how bad of a GM he is. He's the reason holding the Cowboys franchise back. In my opinion, he's probably the biggest reason they haven't won a Super Bowl since, God, a decade before I was born. So he is the biggest thing. I mean, we've all made jokes about it. They did it with Dak. They did it with CD. They do it with every player they have. They refuse to pay them when they should pay them. They try and drag their feet as long as they can. And what happens? They either lose one of their star players or they have to sign them to a deal that is worth way more than they could have got them, 1 or 2 years prior. They should have extended Micah Parsons 2 years ago. If they did, they would have got ahead of guys like Myles Garrett, like TJ Watt, like potentially Trey Hendrickson. But now they've waited, they've let the market set itself, and now why should Micah, accept anything less than what those guys got? He shouldn't. He deserves, he deserves the record-breaking contract just like those other guys did. He is that good. So this is just another example of how Dallas just drags their feet with their players, and how Jerry Jones is just a really, really bad GM. It, as I always say, yes, I understand why people criticize AB. I'm not going to sit here and argue with them. I completely get it. But one thing that you can't criticize this front office for, and that includes AB, is getting ahead of the market. They identify their talent early and pay their talent early. And, yes, that might not always work out. You might pay someone that turns out not to be that great. Okay. But when it does work out, you're saving millions and millions and millions. They got ahead of the safety market with Grant Delpit. They got ahead of the corner market with Denzel Ward. They got ahead of the linebacker market with JOK. And they got ahead of the wide receiver market massively last year. I mean, still to this day, that's an unbelievable contract that they gave Jerry Jeudy. And I said it at the time. Most people disagreed with me, but I think everyone would probably agree with me now. $17 million a year for your wide receiver one is fantastic business. And then, of course, getting ahead of the Myles Garrett contract. People might say, how is that getting ahead? They broke the record. But trust me, if they waited a few more months, that would have been even more. So the Micah situation is definitely more, shall we say, interesting than the Terry McLaurin one. I do think Terry McLaurin just ends up, re-signing with the Commanders. If I had to say now, I probably would say that Micah does end up with the Cowboys, but I think there's more of a chance of him leaving. The way he wrote that message, the way he wrote his trade request, he's clearly bothered by this. This is clearly not something that he's willing to budge on. So I suppose that the question that finally leads us to is, would the Browns trade for Micah Parsons? As I said, this is definitely more likely than a Terry McLaurin, because this is a genuine, this is setting up your franchise long term for the future. This is basically pairing two of the top 5 pass rushers in the NFL together. This is basically giving Myles Garrett, the best running mate he could possibly ever have for the final years of his career. It would be unbelievable. So would they do it? Can they do it? Yes, absolutely yes. Would they do it? I doubt it. Being honest, I doubt it. I wish I could sit here and play the engagement game and be like, oh, they're going to trade for Micah Parsons, watch this space and all of this stuff. But I do think it is unlikely. Can they do it? As I said, yes. I've spoken on this channel a lot about the Browns' financial model. I've tried to, explain it as best as I can to people. I've had Jack Duffin on my channel to try and explain that to people. But it does get lost in the wind a little bit. Some people seem to still believe that the Browns are this kind of, they've got no cap space and they've got no money. That's just not the case. The Browns' financial model allows for moves like this. This is why I'm such a fan of it, because No other financial model in the NFL keeps you this flexible, while also, paying your players. You could say that, well, if you have a poor model and you just don't pay anyone, then yes, of course you can go and sign someone. But to be able to actually retain your talent, i.e., Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, etc., but also be able to stay flexible to make big swinging moves like this, like they did with Watson, which of course didn't work out. But that's how they're able to do this, because of their financial model. Yes, of course, it would put a burden on that. Of course, when you're paying two pass rushers probably 40 million a year, that of course is going to require some kind of management elsewhere on the roster. But they can do it, and 100% can do it. So that's not the hurdle here. The hurdle is not that the Browns can't afford it or can't do it. And even so that they can afford the financial aspect of it, and they could also afford the trade package as well. Because let's be real, it's going to cost minimum 2 first-round picks. The Browns have 2 first-round picks next year alone, so they've got the draft capital to do it, and they've got the financial availability to do it. But that doesn't mean that they will do it. And the biggest reason I don't think they will do it is because they're not in a position to be giving up future first round picks and essentially take themselves out of any quarterback sweepstakes over the next 2 years, because they don't have a quarterback. If the Browns had a quarterback, let's say Deshaun Watson worked, and we're in this alternative universe where the Browns are contenders and Deshaun Watson is a top 5 quarterback. Yes, this is a move they would try and make. They would be making the phone call. They would be trying to make this move. If Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel came into camp week 1 and looked like Patrick Mahomes, and they were like, wow, we've lucked into a really good quarterback, then yes, this is a move that they would make, and and Andrew Berry would be making that phone call. But I just don't think, in the position that they are in, not knowing whether or not, if they have a long-term solution at quarterback, they're not in a position to be giving up the assets that would needed to be given up, in my opinion. If you want Micah Parsons, you have to be happy with, as I said, taking yourself out of the quarterback sweepstakes for the next 2 years. That takes you out of the Arch Manning sweepstakes. That takes you out of the Lenoris Sellers sweepstakes, and so on. So you would essentially be giving that up for Micah Parsons. Some people might still argue that's worth it. I mean, as I said, a defensive line with Micah Parsons, Mason Graham, and Myles Garrett would be the best defensive line in the NFL by quite some bit. Would be one of the best defensive lines we've probably ever seen. But Quincy Carrier had a great kind of take on this, which is that there is a ceiling with your defensive line versus, let's say, a quarterback, because if you have the best quarterback in the league, you don't have a ceiling. They can just they can make things out of nothing. They can play above bad offensive line play, or bad wide receiver play, or bad no run game, and all of this stuff. Just look at Joe Burrow, just look at Patrick Mahomes. Whereas a defensive line does have a ceiling, because an offense can essentially just not drop back, just essentially not give any chance for those guys to wreck the game as much as they can. So yes, it would be amazing. Yes, it would just be so fun to watch, especially someone like me that is an absolute fiend for defensive line play. I would absolutely love it. But it's just the assets that you would give up, taking yourselves out of the quarterback sweepstakes. I just don't see the Browns doing it, and I just again, I think it's more likely that they would do this than Terry McLaurin. Like with Terry, I don't think Andrew Berry would have even picked up the phone. Whereas with a Micah Parsons, he probably picked up the phone. He probably rang just to see. But I just don't see it. I don't see him or the Browns giving up, the assets that would be required when they're in the position that they're in now. Who knows? Maybe they know something about one of these quarterbacks that we haven't seen, and they are confident enough to make this move. We'll have to wait and see. But as I said, I don't think it's likely. if the Browns are going to make a trade, it's not going to be for one of the best players in the NFL, not in the position that they are currently in. So, as much as it would be fun to entertain it, I would be lying, and I'd just be grifting and trying to get clicks. So, but that doesn't mean that it's not 100%. As I said, Terry McLaurin, I would just write that off, chuck that out the window. I don't think that's happening at all. Micah Parsons, while I think it's unlikely, he is that good, and this front office has shown their willingness to throw their hat in these kind of moves. So I wouldn't 100% rule it out, but I do think it's unlikely. But we'll have to wait and see what happens with the Browns in the coming weeks. The season is nearly less than a month away. The Browns play football, next week on Friday. So looking forward to that. Keep your eyes peeled for my channel. Going to have a Panthers fan on after the game to kind of talk about, get his perspective on the Browns and what he thinks about this team going into the season. Of course, continuing to talk about training camp, continuing to talk about this quarterback battle. So, if you want average Browns takes, moderate jokes, moderately funny jokes from this random British guy, this is the place to be. Always commenting on it, always posting on it, always looking for people to come and enjoy it with me. So that would do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if that means I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing week. Keep your eyes peeled for Micah Parsons. Maybe, probably not. But most importantly, go Browns.